I have made it a point to never go to Milwaukee.
And you've still never been?
Proceed.
Well, Mr. Lloyd, thank you so much for joining us here. This is an incredible honor for us to have you on our stage, and I know our audience as well, so thank you very much. We have a lot of material that we're going to be showing in this series, beginning all the way back in 1951 with the Omnibus documentary that you directed on Abraham Lincoln. But we're sort of taking up your television career tonight in midway point in 1973 when Carola was first broadcast. You had completed your work with the Alfred Hitchcock series, I believe in 1965. You had been doing some producing work at Universal for theater or for theatrical feature films. And I wanted to ask you if you could set the stage for your involvement with the series Hollywood Television Theater so we could sort of set the stage for the production of Carola. How did you sort of come to KCET in this Hollywood Television Theater series?
I had moments of intelligence, but I had many lapses. And so these lapses took the form of my acting. Louis Friedman was producer of the Hollywood Television Theater and a superb producer, first-class producer. He produced Andersonville for KCET, which won the Emmy that year. And he had asked me at one point to do a production called The Scarecrow by Percy Mackay, which I did with Gene Wilder. And it all worked very well. We had a good time doing it. At that point, I'm trying to remember exactly the continuity here. At that point, he was producing, or shortly after Scarecrow, a production of Awake and Sing by Clifford Odets. And he had a director, a very prominent director, a very good director, but they had a falling out somewhere in the middle of casting. And he asked me if I would come in and produce and direct Awake and Sing. Well, I had never directed four-camera television. I had directed one-camera film, single camera. But he asked me to do this, and I love the play. I think it's one of the finest American plays. And so I agreed to do it. And I brought along with me Walter Matthau, and who always at rehearsal would say to me, Norman, do you realize Beethoven was so deaf, he thought he was painting? He was a good friend. So I brought along Walter and Marty Ritt, who was an actor before he became a director, and as a matter of fact, I'd acted with them in the theater. So they came along, and I had a good time doing it, but I knew nothing about handling four cameras. I saw everything from a single camera point of view. The result of that was that another director was brought in, Robert Hopkins, who was a master of handling these four cameras as they went along, as the show went along. And the Directors Guild has a ruling that whoever calls the shots must get directorial credit. So I would stage the piece from the single camera point of view. I saw it as a single camera, but Bob Hopkins would then translate it to 4 cameras, so you got all the movement of the cameras, and it was a 4-camera show. And that was how I came to KCET.
And we'll be showing Awake and Sing later on in this series, so check it out when it's playing here. So now you had a long relationship with Jean Renoir previous to Carola. Can you provide us some of the background for how you met Jean Renoir, your relationship over the years, and how it came that he really entrusted you to direct the play for Carola for this TV show?
Well, I met Jean. I was brought to his office, aware that I was meeting a really great man in our profession, one of the really great men. And so I came in, I was much younger then, full of show-off, you know? I wanted to show Jean that I had all the energy in the world and so on. He had more. And I came in for this part of this sort of half-wit, sort of typecasting. This half-wit kid who roamed around the farm.
This was for The Southerner.
What?
The Southerner, the film The Southerner?
The Southerner.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I was having this meeting with Jean because he was going to do this picture, The Southerner. And so I came in and I started doing a lot of acting in the office. And Jean looks, you know, but he was sweet. He was so full of humanity. He was amused. And as a result of that meeting, I got the part. And then we went out on location and we shot the picture. And on location, I got to know him much better. And he was a fascinating individual. And we became friends. And then later, my wife and I were invited to their home, Jean Dido, his wife's home. And we spent time there, had dinners there and so on. So gradually, he became a great friend, and we would talk about pictures, and we would talk about what we'd seen. And I would listen to Jean. I remember after he saw a particular picture, The Blue Angel, when it was over, he said, "It's too bad masterpieces have to be so long." He wrote one of the great lines in the history of the world, I think. It's in one of his pictures. The line is, "Unfortunately, everyone has his reasons." I think that is one of the great, worthy of Shakespeare. So, as a consequence of what I've described to you, I got to know Jean very well, and we became guests at their home, and he at mine. And then, so I knew Jean very well. And along when I had the Hollywood Television Theatre, I wanted him to direct something for me. And he had written this play called Carola, which had received a production at the University of California at Berkeley. And now he wanted to do it as a film. But unfortunately, time and the human physique took their toll. And Jean was in a very weak state. And he wasn't well. He was mentally great, but physically he was not up to directing a picture. So when I got the Hollywood Television Theatre, I asked Jean, could I possibly do it on the Hollywood Television Theatre? Instead of having to go through a whole thing of getting money and getting a production and all that kind of thing. And he gave me permission to do it. And that's how I came to direct it, because he said, you have to direct it, meaning me. He gave us the play to do. And I was very proud that I had a Renoir piece that I could attach my name to.
Did that give you a particular sense of responsibility when you were producing the play and for television? I mean, did you feel any kind of weight when you were putting it together, or was it something that you just tried to approach as a project?
You do, when you're working on a piece by Renoir, you do feel an additional responsibility. Yes, you do. You know, because he's watching you, not on the stage, but you're reporting to him about who's playing which part, and so on and so forth. And I consulted with him. Leslie Caron plays the leading lady, and I did that with Jean and so forth. Mm-hmm. You do feel an additional responsibility when you're working with those people, when you're working with the Renoir, when you're working with a Hitchcock, when you're working with a Chaplin. You know you're dealing in another sphere. not just another director. Yeah. There's a demand made on you unconsciously that you become aware of, that you better make intelligent remarks, because otherwise you're going to be a fool.
There is an amazing scene that you describe in one paragraph in your memoir about a moment of time in Hollywood that when I finished reading it, I almost just died, because felt like I was born in the wrong era. And I probably wouldn't be hanging out with you even if I had been, but still, because it's an amazing scene. You describe you and John Houseman had started a theater company at a theater on La Cienega. Is it the Crescent Theater? The Coronet Theatre. The Coronet Theatre.
Coronet.
And in one paragraph, you talk about you restored the Coronet Theatre, and you were working with Charles Laughton, who was performing in Bertolt Brecht's Galileo.
That was the world premiere of his Galileo, of Brecht's Galileo.
And when the theater was closed, you were also booking classic films from the MoMA collection and bringing them out to show in the theater. The lobby furniture had been designed by Charles and Ray Eames, and you all had this amazing scene happening at the Coronet Theatre. So you have theater, you have film, you have art and design, all in the 40s. What point did television enter this milieu, and how did television fit into your sense of the arts in relation to theater and film? Did you feel a kind of passion for television when you started coming in?
It was to make a buck. All the things you're describing before cost money.
Yes.
And we rapidly ran out. But it was worth it.
Right. So television was just...
And those people were worth it, and the people you mentioned, Brecht and Laughton, and the actors we had there, wonderful actors. And working on this play, Galileo, which I think is one of the great plays of the 20th century. And as I said a moment ago, this was the first production of it. Right. Charles had been working on it for 2 years. Right. And he was a caution. He was an amazing guy. He had genius. He did.
Right.
But it was fascinating to work with him because you never knew what would happen.
Right. Right.
No, television came along about that time. And I initially got into it because MCA started to do half-hour television shows of very small consequence. But it was a way of earning a living. Mm-hmm. And it was between pictures. Pictures didn't come that often. As a matter of fact, the reason that John Houseman and I had the theater, we had been together in the Mercury Theater with Orson.
Of course.
And the reason we had the Coronet Theatre is that John and I said one day, you know, this is terrible. There's no theater. We have no theater. We're not working enough. And we did it so we could have a theater.
Sure.
That was the only reason. And we were lucky to be able to put it together. But the point of it was to give us that theatrical activity. Mm-hmm. When this new thing, television, came along, not so new, although it goes back to 1939 or thereabouts. Mm-hmm. And you know the oldest piece of live television that exists is 5 minutes from 1939 is me.
Yes, you're in it. It's
You've got it up there?
It's at the Paley Center, and we're trying to get it for this series. I was going to surprise you, but we haven't got it yet. But
I just want to point out that I do in this scene the worst acting you have ever seen. It is so bad, it's good. You can't believe it.
Well, it's remarkable because it was a made-for-television drama directed by Anthony Mann.
That's right.
And the only surviving footage of it is, I guess it's someone filmed it off the television, and only 5 minutes of it survive, and there's no sound. So I guess your acting, we couldn't judge your acting all that much because there's no sound. But it's the oldest fragment of surviving television, and you are in it from 1939. It's amazing.
The performance is amazing.
Right.
I enjoy watching it. I say, you know, Norman, you are really the worst. I'll tell you who else was in it. There was a girl named Phyllis.
I can't remember.
Phyllis. She changed her name to Jennifer Jones.
Okay.
And there was George Coulouris. And there was John Cole, but we were the 3 or 4 people in it. A thing I remember from that first experience in television is when I was finished doing it, I got into the elevator on the 3rd floor at NBC, and it came, I got in on another floor, and it came down to the 3rd floor, the door opened, and in walks a very lovely NBC page lady, and Frank Lloyd Wright. And he is saying to this page, he having just made an appearance on television, he is saying to this page, no one will ever watch this. That was his prediction about television.
I have one more question, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience, and we'll have microphones in the aisles, so please raise your hand, and we'll bring you a microphone. But over the years, working first with Omnibus on the Abraham Lincoln biography with James Agee, who wrote the script, Alfred Hitchcock, and then Hollywood Television Theater, did you find, even though you got into it to pay the bills, that you developed an affinity or an understanding of the medium television? And did you come to did you ever come to appreciate television?
Yes, I did. When I did St. Elsewhere.
You did St. Elsewhere. Aha, right.
St. Elsewhere, primarily because of the writing. I thought it was written as well as any movie that I'd ever been part of.
Right.
And then it had a pretty good cast.
Mm-hmm.
Better than pretty good.
Right. Yeah.
It had some remarkable people. One of whom I wish to pay tribute to was Ed Flanders.
Mm-hmm.
Good, I'll join you. There was no better actor in America, and it's a tragedy what happened with Ed, but he was such a brilliant actor, and one is very moved when one thinks about him. We had Denzel Washington, who called himself the token black. I liked that. That was very, I mean, he had a sense of humor. Yeah. And we had very good people. I'm not going to go through the whole cast. And so that show, for the 6 years that we did it, I felt about that show that I was working at the highest level that you could work in this business, which you usually feel only in the theater.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But that show had it. So in reply to your question, did I ever feel it about television? Yes, with St. Elsewhere. Not with so many other things.
Okay. Well, we're gonna turn it over to the audience. Are there any questions? Tons of questions. Let's go right here in this aisle, right here. Wait for the microphone. Yeah, you. Yep, the microphone's coming. Please speak into the microphone. Yeah, sorry about that.
My name is Mortimer Chambers. Norman, I had not known this, and I'm not even sure I do know it now, but the other day in the Los Angeles Times, there was an article about you referring to this series that is now beginning. And in the article, it said that you had suffered in perhaps the 1960s by being associated with what is famously known as the blacklist, actors and writers who could not perform in Hollywood because their politics was suspect. And I wonder if you could say a bit about this, if this is not too unpleasant a part of your career to look back on. You've certainly surmounted it now, but if there was this period when you were persecuted because, as the paper said, you knew very well many of the liberal people in this community, and in fact, Hollywood is, on the whole, a very liberal society. So that's my question to you.
If I understand.
Did you feel at all during the 1950s or 60s any pressure because of the blacklist? A lot of your friends and people you knew and colleagues had been blacklisted. Did you feel that you had been blacklisted at all?
I felt it completely. Not only my friends, who were many, who were blacklisted, but my associations. I mean, I was a friend of Chaplin. Chaplin was barred from coming back into this country. Actually, Chaplin, I was honored by Chaplin to do a story we were going to do, which he was going to let me direct, and he was going to write and produce. It was for his son, Sidney.
That was the adaptation of They Shoot Horses, don't they?
When they barred Charlie from coming back, when he was in the middle of the ocean, they said he had to pass a moral turpitude test. He said, "I'll never make another picture in America," and he never did. And this was multiplied many times with people, Louis Milestone, with whom I had a very close association and did Arch of Triumph with him, acted in Walk in the Sun, one of the most beautiful pictures that I've ever known. And a remarkable picture about the war. Milestone had to go to Europe. Joe Losey had to go to Europe. All these people I knew, and by association, I was guilty of what? I don't know, but there we are. Mm-hmm. So in reply to your question, yes, I did feel it. And it is to my everlasting love for Hitchcock that when he wanted to have me work on his television show, the name had to be submitted to the network, which it was. And the word came back, and this was told me by Alan Miller, who was the head of television of MCA at the time, came back and said to Alan Miller, the network, there's a problem about Norman Lloyd. So Alan Miller went to Hitchcock and said, the network says there's a problem about Norman Lloyd. And Hitchcock, I can just see him. Hitchcock said 3 words, I want him. It was over. There was never any problem anymore. You know, all that required was for somebody to do that. If some of the guys had done that, you wouldn't have had all these people being cut off in the ocean or whatever was going on, with so many people who, by association, were condemned. Mm-hmm. Because we know there were tragedies that came out of this. Oh, sure. So.
Another question from the audience right here on the aisle.
Hello. I'm just curious if you're watching anything currently and you're enjoying it.
Anything you're watching on TV now? Or
What's that?
anything you're watching on TV now that you're enjoying? Is that the question? Television? They say now that now is the golden age of the new golden age of television, where television is the new cinema now.
Who said so?
They say so.
They'll never improve on the 35 millimeter black and white. And by the way, a lot of directors are saying that now.
Yes.
Not only moi, but some very good directors are saying this is the only way to make a picture. Mm-hmm. All this other stuff. So I'm subjective about it. I don't go to movies. I'm sure there are good pictures.
There's some, sure.
Yeah. But I start by objecting to the price.
Yes.
Do you know I was raised more than raised, I was already raised in the Depression, the Great Depression of the 30s, during which time motion pictures became the recreation of America. And you could go to a movie for a quarter at a certain time of day, and even 50 cents you could see at the Paramount, the vaudeville show, the stage show with Harry James or Cab Calloway, and wonderful performers, in addition to the movie. And you had wonderful movies. But something has happened. You just yourselves out there think. Do you remember the stars that existed in the 30s? Or are you aware of the stars? So I don't have to list them. I don't have to talk to you not only about Gable and Eddie Robinson and Jimmy Cagney and Spencer Tracy and the women Crawford and Betty Davis and so on. I could go on and on. Real stars, adult actors. They had the quality of being adults. You cannot name a star for me today. There is none. And if I'm to be quoted, I will confess that I said it. And as for the women and the men, and you know, even the people who play these leads in these pictures, these people, there's a quality of adolescence about them. I'm not being cute about this. If you think about the stars I mentioned a moment ago, there was something adult about them. I mean, Charles Boyer was an adult when he looked at Betty Davis. It was an adult relationship. Do I have to go on?
We have a question back here.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about the film series at the Coronet Theatre. My understanding it was the earliest and most important film series. And I wonder if you remember the people who ran the film series at the Coronet. I think it was David Bradley and Raymond Rohauer.
Talking about the film series at the Coronet Theatre that you had helped to organize and you were participating in, or at least gave a space to. Can you talk a little bit about the film programming at the Coronet Theatre?
What?
The film programming at the Coronet Theatre.
It came from, we brought all the films from the Museum of Modern Art in New York.
Mm-hmm. Was that the first time, in your memoir, you describe it as the first time that kind of repertory or classic film programming had happened in Los Angeles?
Out here, yeah. It was the first time, and we made this deal with the Museum of Modern Art, and we ran the picture. A man who became a director later was the projectionist, Curtis Harrington.
Oh, yeah, Curtis Harrington, right.
And he ushered the whole thing, and we ran it during the week. And in the hope of getting some subscribers. Mm-hmm. But we lost money. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions. Let's go right here. Oh, bring the mic on down right here. Yeah.
Mr. Lloyd, well, I'd like to preface this firstly by saying, years ago when I had no money, I was doing transcriptions of various things for a friend, and he was of interviews with people. And he had interviewed you about A Walk in the Sun because he was trying to get a remake made of the film. And I had done this before, and transcribing interviews is typically a very grueling thing. It's not something I would recommend to anyone because people would talk into their collars and they'd mumble. And your diction was always so wonderful that it was such a pleasure to transcribe your interview as opposed to anybody else's that I was so thankful that that I could do this. But anyway, my question is, of all the things you've ever done, is there some dream project as a producer that you have always wanted to make and just never got to do?
Question.
Is there a dream project that you never got to complete that you always wanted to finish? Stage, theater, or television? Was there something that got away that you wish hadn't?
I mentioned earlier that I was going to do a picture with Chaplin as a director. I had appeared in Limelight for him, but I was going to do They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Chaplin and I own the property. I say and I because he had me buy it in his name, so they would know. We owned the property for 16 years, at which point he was cut off in the middle of the ocean and said he'd never have anything more to do with American films. I did want to do that, but I can't really think of anything else that I have really wanted to do so desperately that I would have killed for it. No, I can't.
Well, you've done so much already, so it's you've done so much already that's so amazing. So
Well,
your checklist.
I've had
is
some
complete.
luck.
Yes. One more question. You have time for one more question. Right down here. There's a microphone coming to you. Please hang on.
Okay. My name is William Link, and I worked for you, Norman, with my now late partner and collaborator, Dick Levinson. It was Link and Levinson.
With whom?
He says he worked with Dick Levinson.
Dick Levinson.
Dick Levinson.
My name is Bill Link, Norman.
Oh, my,
It's Bill Link.
one of the great men. You are all in the presence of one of the great men.
Thank you.
You
It was, It was great working with.
Absolutely. Lincoln Levinson, they were the history of television. They were fantastic. Mr. Link was, with great pride, told me one day they sold me a story that they didn't know how they were going to finish.
That's right. That's right. What a memory.
He was very proud of that. But my goodness, what work they did. And Columbo was theirs,
Yeah.
which is one of the great series, that marvelous character. And
Murder, She Wrote.
exactly.
14 other on-the-air series.
Oh, Bill, I'm
It's a
so
record.
glad you're here.
It's a record. Oh, I wouldn't miss this, Norman. You know, you were a very good director, too. That hasn't come out. Television, on the Hitchcock show. You did a couple that were very fine. Now, I wanted to
Thank
ask you, one day I called up your office, and the secretary got my name wrong. She said, Mr. Wink is on the phone. And you said immediately, oh, ask him if Mr. Wevinson is with him.
That was the only way to deal with writers, you know. But you are in the presence of one of the major figures in the history of television. This fellow sitting right here with his partner, Levinson, Richard Levinson, a charming, lovely guy. Not to say that you're not. But I'm so glad to say hello. Beautiful.
Thank you so
beautiful.
much.
You all have lived for years with what Bill Link has created with his partner. They were the tops.
Well, unless there's one more question, we think we have one more. Let's go for right here in the middle.
Good evening, Mr. Lloyd. I wanted to tell you one of my favorite pieces you did for television was the Omnibus Lincoln. And you used Royal Dano, and it was so early in Royal's career, but he's fantastic in it, and he really is called upon to carry it, which he does. And I'd just like to hear you talk a little about working with him at that time.
With Royal?
Working with Royal Dano on the Abraham Lincoln documentary, how did you come to cast him, and what were the qualities of his performance that you were looking for, and just what was it like to work with Royal Dano that early in his career?
2 words. 2 words. James Agee. Jim Agee wrote the Lincoln pictures. And Jim Agee was one of our finest writers, not only of the Lincoln pictures, but Death in the Family, and he was the leading film critic in the country at the time that he was reviewing film. He was absolutely, well, Jim had a kind of genius. He was important, he was real, he was great. And the reason I bring that up in reply to your question, when he put me on, he got de Rochemont to hire me to direct the piece. And I'd gotten to know Jim through Chaplin. Just by way of digression for a moment, Jim was trying to get Chaplin to do a picture. And he wrote a treatment for Charlie to be in it. Now, Charlie at this point was close to 70. And he had changed from the absolute, he was like a reed when he was the Tramp. I mean, he was so thin and pliable, and he could do anything, skate, dance with his body. At this point in his life, Charlie had taken on weight, and he wasn't fat because he stayed very active, playing a lot of tennis, but he had thickened. Now, Jim Agee wrote this piece, and I'll get to your question.
Take your time.
But Jim Agee is responsible for Royal Dano. Now, Jim Angie wrote a treatment that he wanted Charlie to do. The premise was the atom bomb goes off on the earth and everything is wiped out. And then you fasten on rubble. And through the rubble comes a cane. And with it, a derby. And Charlie. Wonderful. Jim gave it to Charlie, and Charlie said no. And if I may say so, Charlie gave it to me to read, and he said, it's very good, but I'm not going to do it because I can no longer play that character. He's talking about the tramp because he physically had changed. He was elderly and thickened and so forth. The character he did play when he got older was Limelight, the old actor. So that's how I got to know Jim, and we talked a great deal, and he was a wonderful human being, terrific guy. He put Royal Dano, he cast Dano in the Lincoln films, and it was a brilliant piece of casting. I thought Royal was so good in it, and brought something to it instead of the sort of melancholy holiness. He really brought an authenticity to it, particularly because it was Lincoln at a certain age, very early age, and Royal conveyed that. And so the answer to your question is, when I arrived on the scene, when they cast me as the director, and I was cast by Jim, because he's the one who told de Rochemont to put me on, when I came to do the picture, came east, we shot it in the east, Royal was already cast. I had nothing to do with the casting of Royal. Mm-hmm. But it was a godsend. I mean, he was wonderful, wonderful in the picture. Yeah.
Just quickly, that we're showing the first episode from, I think it was a 5-part series of the biography of Abraham Lincoln. And that sequence, actually, the first episode has one of the most amazing sequences in the whole series, which is the funeral train sequence after Lincoln's assassination. It's really one of the most, I think it's just the highlights, one of the highlights of the series of series of highlights. And that sequence is often sometimes credited to Stanley Kubrick, who was a assistant director on the film or working the second unit, but really it was a sequence that you had put together, sort of, you had conceived the funeral train sequence in that first episode.
He had nothing to do with it.
Right, but he sometimes gets credit for it, so we should set the record straight. While he did do some still shots and second unit work, he wasn't part of that sequence. But it's such a beautiful sequence, and Mr. Lloyd reads the poem, the Walt Whitman poem, When Last
in the Dooryard Blues.
Right.
Yes.
It's an amazing reading. It's an amazing sequence. So, and that's playing with The Last of Mrs. Lincoln, which was another Hollywood television episode that you put together. So it's going to be a good night. Well, that's all we have time for. We need to move on to Carola, but I want to thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd, for your time. I appreciate it.